cabin smelled of damp wood and neglect when I first unlocked the door. It was a steel 30 acres of pine forest and a rickety one-bedroom retreat for less than my old car's worth. The realtor warned me it hadn't been touched in years, but I didn't care. I needed the quiet, the kind you can't buy in the city. That first night, though, the silence wasn't what I'd hoped. I'd built a fire to chase off the chill, the logs crackling in the stone fireplace that dominated the living room. The wind outside was restless, whistling through the trees, and every so often it'd gust down the chimney, sending ash swirling onto the hearth. I was half asleep on the couch, the flames dying to embers, when I heard it, a faint rustling like dry leaves skittering across pavement. It wasn't the wind. It came from inside the chimney. I sat up, ears straining. The sound stopped, then started again, sharper, like something shifting against the stone. Mice, I told myself. Old places like this always have critters. But it didn't feel right. It was too deliberate, too heavy. I grabbed the poker from the hearth and crouched by the fireplace, peering up into the dark throat of the flue. The embers cast a weak glow, barely touching the shadows above. Nothing. Just soot and silence. Then it moved again, louder, closer. A scrape, a thud. My pulse kicked up. I shoved the poker into the chimney, jabbing blindly, and hit something soft but solid. It shifted, and before I could pull back, a shape tumbled down, landing in the ash with a dull thump. I stumbled back, the poker clattering to the floor. It was a doll. Filthy, its burlap skin blackened with soot, its button eyes glinting in the ember light. Its hair was a tangle of matted yarn, and its dress, some kind of faded calico, was torn at the hem. I stared, my breath shallow. It wasn't just the grime or the way it had fallen, like it had been waiting up there. It was the face. The mouth, stitched into a crooked smile, was too wide, too knowing. And the features, crudely painted, sure, but they looked like mine. The same sharp jaw, the same tilt of the nose. It was me, or close enough to make my skin crawl. I didn't touch it at first. I just watched it, half expecting it to blink. It didn't, of course. It was just a doll, some kid's toy left behind, stuck in the chimney for God knows how long. The resemblance was a trick of the light, my tired brain playing games. I grabbed a rag from the kitchen, wrapped it around the thing, and carried it outside. The wind bit at my face as I tossed it into the brush beyond the porch. It landed with a rustle, swallowed by the dark. Back inside, I locked the door, pointless, maybe, but it felt necessary. The fire was dead now, the room cold and still. I crawled into bed, telling myself it was nothing. Old cabins have old junk. That's all. I woke to a weight on my chest. My eyes snapped open, and there it was, the doll, perched on my pillow, inches from my face. Its button eyes caught the faint moonlight through the window, and that stitched smile seemed wider, wet with something dark. My hands shook as I flung it across the room. It hit the wall with a soft thud and slumped to the floor. I'd thrown it outside. I knew I had. The door was still locked, the windows shut tight. I checked them twice, my breath fogging in the frigid air. When I turned back, the doll was gone. Not on the floor, not under the bed. Gone. But the air felt wrong, heavy, like something was listening. I didn't sleep again that night. I sat by the cold fireplace, poker in hand, waiting for the rustling to start again. Here's part 2 of Doll in the Chimney, concluding the story at roughly 1,500 words total. This part picks up right where part 1 left off, escalating the tension to a shattering climax. The poker felt useless in my grip, its cold iron no match for the weight pressing down on the room. Dawn was hours away, and the cabin had turned into a cage, every creak of the floorboards, every sigh of the wind, a taunt. I kept my eyes on the fireplace, the black maw where that thing had come from. The doll was gone, but I could still feel it like a splinter lodged under my skin. I don't know how long I sat there before I heard it again, the rustling. Not from the chimney this time, but above me. The ceiling groaned, a slow, deliberate scrape moving from one end of the room to the other. I tilted my head back, staring at the warped planks overhead. Dust sifted down, catching in my throat. Something was in the attic. I hadn't checked the attic yet. The trapdoor was in the bedroom closet, a square hatch I'd barely noticed when I moved in. I didn't want to go up there. Every instinct screamed to stay put, to wait for daylight. But the scraping grew louder, rhythmic, like fingernails dragging across wood. I couldn't sit there and listen to it anymore. I grabbed the flashlight from my bag, its beam shaking as I opened the closet door. The hatch was there, a rusty latch holding it shut. The air coming through the cracks was sour, like wet earth and rot. I yanked the latch, and the trapdoor dropped open with a bang, a ladder unfolding into the dark. The scraping stopped. Silence clawed at me. I climbed, each rung creaking under my weight. The flashlight cut through the gloom, revealing a low, slanted space choked with cobwebs. Old boxes sagged in the corners, their edges chewed by time. The beam swept across the floor and froze. Footprints. Bare, small, smudged in the dust, leading from the ladder to a far corner where the roof dipped low. They weren't mine. My mouth went dry. I followed them, the light trembling in my hand. The corner was shadowed, but something glinted there, those damn button eyes. The doll sat propped against a beam, its head cocked like it had been waiting. Its stitched mouth glistened, the dark stain I'd seen before now streaking down its burlap chin. It wasn't wet with water. It smelled coppery sharp. I swung the flashlight around, searching for whatever had moved it because it hadn't climbed up here alone. The attic was empty. Just me, the doll, and the footprints that ended where it sat. My stomach twisted. I lunged forward, snatched it up, and hurled it toward the hatch. It hit the floor with a crack, one arm snapping loose, but I didn't care. I needed it gone. That's when the ladder rattled. Not a creak, a violent shake, like something was climbing fast. I spun the light downward, but the beam caught only dust swirling in the air. The rattling stopped, and a low, wet gurgle echoed from below. My legs locked. I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. The doll's head turned. Not fell, asterisk turned star. Its neck twisted with a faint pop, those button eyes locking onto mine from where it lay by the hatch. The gurgle came again, closer, and the ladder shook once more. I scrambled back, slamming into a beam, the flashlight slipping from my hand. It rolled, the light spinning wildly before settling on the doll. Its good arm was moving now, dragging itself forward, the broken one trailing behind. I don't remember shouting, but my throat was raw when I grabbed a splintered board from a crate and swung. The doll's head caved in, buttons flying, burlap splitting open. Something wet spilled out red, thick, stinking of iron. I hit it again and again until it was a pulpy mess. The gurgling stopped. The ladder went still. I didn't climb down until the sky outside turned gray. The bedroom was empty, the ladder undisturbed. But when I stepped into the living room, the fireplace was lit. A fresh fire roared, logs I hadn't touched stacked neatly in the hearth. And on the mantel, smeared in soot, was a single button eye staring at me. I left that morning. Didn't pack, didn't look back. The cabin can rot for all I care. The last night, in a motel 2 states away, I woke to a rustling in the vents. And when I turned on the light, my pillow was streaked with soot. The loft was a compromise. I'd wanted a house, something with a yard, but the city's prices laughed me out of that dream. So I signed the lease on a 4th-floor walk-up in a converted warehouse, exposed brick, high ceilings, and a view of nothing but more brick across the alley. It was mine, though, and after months of crashing on friends' couches that mattered more than the peeling paint or the faint hum of the elevator shaft next door. The first week was fine. I unpacked, hung a few prints, and ignored the way the floor creaked under the cheap rug I'd thrown down. It was an old building, settling noises were part of the deal. But on the 8th day, I decided to fix the wobble in my coffee table. The shortest leg was on the rug's edge where the floor dipped slightly. I figured a shim would do it, so I peeled back the rug to check the boards. That's when I found the seam. A thin, deliberate cut ran parallel to the planks, maybe 2 feet long, hidden unless you were looking for it. I pressed on it, and the wood popped up like a trapdoor, revealing a shallow hollow beneath. My breath caught. Inside were dolls, dozens of them, crammed together in a tangle of limbs and glassy eyes. They were small, no bigger than my hand, with porcelain faces and faded cloth bodies. Each had a tag tied around its neck, a scrap of paper with a name scribbled in shaky ink. I pulled one out, * Margaret Hensley *, and another, * Thomas Rourke star. Names I didn't know written in different hands. I sat back on my heels, the dolls staring up at me. The air felt colder, sharper, like the room was holding its breath. I told myself they were leftovers from some eccentric tenant, a creepy hobby abandoned when they moved out. The building was over a century old, plenty of people had lived here. I grabbed my phone, snapped a photo, and sent it to my friend Jen with a caption, * found this under my floor. Haunted much, * she texted back a laughing emoji, and burned them. I didn't burn them. I scooped them into a cardboard box, 32 in all, and shoved it into the closet. The names nagged at me, though. Who were they? Why hide them? That night, I couldn't sleep. The loft was too quiet, the kind of quiet that presses on your ears. Around 2 a.m. I heard it, a creak, slow and deliberate like someone pacing the room. I bolted upright, heart hammering, but the loft was empty. Just shadows and the hum of the city outside. The next morning, I dragged the rug back over the trapdoor and tried to forget it. Work was a blur, my mind stuck on those tags. When I got home, the rug was shifted, bunched up against the couch. I froze. I'd left it flat. I yanked it aside and the trapdoor was open again, the hollow dark and empty. My stomach dropped. I checked the closet, the box was still there, the dolls untouched. I counted them, 32. No more, no less. I locked the trapdoor with a screwdriver, twisting it into the wood until it wouldn't budge. It didn't help. That night, the creaking came back, louder, circling the room. I turned on every light, grabbed a kitchen knife, and sat on the couch, staring at the floor. The sound stopped at dawn, but I didn't sleep. I couldn't shake the feeling that something had been testing me, waiting for me to crack. By noon, I was back at the trapdoor, screwdriver in hand. I had to know. I pried it open, and the hollow wasn't empty anymore. A single doll lay there, new, its porcelain face gleaming, its tag crisp. The name on it was mine, Elliot Crane *, in my own handwriting, the jagged scrawl I'd used since grade school. My hands shook as I picked it up. Its eyes, black and unblinking, seemed to follow me. And then I heard it, a soft, uneven creak, right behind me. I whipped around, the knife slipping in my sweaty grip. The loft was empty, the afternoon light streaming through the grimy windows, but the creak lingered in my ears, a sound too close to footsteps. The doll with my name, Elliot Crane *, stared up from my hand, its black eyes glinting like wet ink. My handwriting on the tag was unmistakable, the sloppy and lopsided C I'd scrawled 1,000 times. I hadn't written it, though. I'd never seen this doll before it appeared in the hollow. I dropped it back into the trapdoor and slammed the wood shut, my pulse thudding in my throat. The screwdriver was still there, its tip bent from last night's frantic locking. I drove it in again, harder, until the floor splintered around it. No way was that thing getting out or anything else getting in. I shoved the rug back, dragged the couch over it, and stood there, listening. The loft was silent, but it didn't feel empty. I couldn't stay still. I grabbed my laptop and searched the names from the tags Margaret Hensley, Thomas Rourke *, a few others I'd memorized. Nothing concrete came up, just obits and census records from decades ago, people who'd lived and died in the city. No connection to the building, no headlines about dolls or missing tenants. I checked the property records next. The warehouse had been apartments since the 50s, a textile mill before that. Hundreds of people had passed through. The dolls could be anyone's. Night fell fast, the alley outside swallowing the last of the light. I kept the lamps on, the TV blaring some mindless sitcom, anything to drown out the quiet. It didn't work. Around midnight, the creaking started again, not from the trapdoor, but from the walls. A slow, dragging sound like something circling the room, brushing against the brick. I muted the TV and held my breath. It moved clockwise, steady, deliberate, pausing every few feet before scraping on. I grabbed the knife and followed it, pressing my ear to the plaster. The sound stopped when I got close, then picked up on the opposite side, taunting me. I checked the windows locked. The door bolted. No one could be in here. But the creaking kept going, louder, until it settled right above the couch, over the trapdoor. Then it went quiet. Too quiet. I edged toward the couch, my shadow stretching across the floor. The rug was flat, the screwdriver still jutting out like a makeshift grave marker. I nudged the couch aside with my foot, half expecting the doll to be sitting there, grinning. It wasn't. The trapdoor was shut tight. I exhaled, shaky, and turned away. That's when I saw the box. It was still in the closet, but the lid was off, flaps splayed open. I hadn't touched it since yesterday. I yanked the door wider, the knife raised, and peered inside. The dolls were there, 32, just as I'd left them. No, 31. One was missing. I counted twice, my hands trembling as I sifted through the porcelain faces. Margaret Hensley was gone. Her tag, her glassy stare, vanished. I spun around, scanning the loft. The creaking hadn't started again, but the air felt thick, like it was pressing back against me. I checked under the couch, behind the TV, even in the kitchen cabinets. Nothing. Then I glanced at the trapdoor. The screwdriver was loose, tilted to one side, like something had pushed it from below. I dropped to my knees and pressed my ear to the wood. A faint rustle, then silence. I didn't want to open it. Every nerve screamed to leave it alone, to grab my keys and run. But I had to know. I pried the screwdriver out, the wood groaning as I lifted the trapdoor. The hollow was empty, no Elliot Crane, no Margaret Hensley. Just dust and a faint, sour smell, like damp cloth left too long. I slammed it shut, my chest tight, and backed away. The creaking started again, sharper, from the ceiling now. I looked up, and a shadow flickered across the brick, small, hunched, gone in a blink. My stomach lurched. I hadn't seen it move, but I knew what it was. And I knew it wasn't alone. The shadow didn't come back, but the ceiling creaked again, sharper, like weight shifting overhead. I grabbed the knife and backed toward the door, my eyes darting between the trapdoor and the exposed brick above. The loft felt smaller, the walls leaning in, the hum of the elevator shaft next door, a low growl I hadn't noticed before. I fumbled with the bolt, my fingers slick with sweat, and yanked the door open. The hallway was dark, the single bulb at the stairwell flickering. I didn't care. I needed out. I made it 3 steps before I heard it, a soft thud back in the loft. Then another. Footsteps, small and uneven, crossing the floor. I froze, one hand on the railing, the knife trembling in the other. The sound stopped at the threshold. I turned slow, dreading what I'd see. The doorway was empty, but the rug was bunched up again, the trapdoor's edge peeking out like a cracked tooth. I should have run. Every instinct begged me to take the stairs, get to the street, and never come back. But my name on that tag, Elliot Crane, burned in my mind. It wasn't just a doll. It was me or something that knew me, and it wasn't done. I stepped back inside, the knife raised, my breath shallow. The loft was still, the TV's glow casting long shadows across the brick. The box in the closet was open, 31 dolls staring blankly. The trapdoor was shut, but the screwdriver lay beside it, bent in half. I crouched, listening. Nothing. No creaks, no rustles. Just my heartbeat, loud and fast. I lifted the trapdoor, though it's scraping my knuckles. The hollow was empty again, but the sour smell was stronger, clinging to my throat. I leaned closer, squinting into the dark, and something shifted, a faint glint deep in the recess where the light didn't reach. I grabbed my phone, turned on the flashlight, and aimed it down. The beam caught porcelain. Margaret Hensley was there, tucked against the far edge, her tag crumpled but legible. Her head was turned, facing me, and her mouth, painted shut yesterday, was cracked open, a thin, jagged line. I recoiled, the phone slipping, its light spinning across the floor. The creaking started again, rapid now, a staccato of tiny steps circling above, below, behind the walls. The loft came alive with it, a chorus of movement I couldn't pin down. I stumbled to my feet, the knife useless in my shaking hand. The box in the closet rattled, the dolls inside shifting, their tags rustling like dry leaves. I kicked it shut, but the lid popped back, and one fell out, Thomas Rourke, his eyes chipped, staring up at me. The TV flickered, the sitcom replaced by static, and in the white noise, I swore I heard my name, whispered low and sharp. The trapdoor slammed open behind me. I spun, and there it was, the doll with my name, Elliot Crane, standing upright in the hollow. Its head tilted, slow, deliberate, and its hands, stiff yesterday, curled into fists. The creaking stopped. The air went heavy like a storm about to break. I lunged for it, swinging the knife, but it toppled backward, lifeless, just as the walls erupted. They came from everywhere, dolls, dozens, spilling out of the brick like it was melting, their porcelain faces gleaming in the TV's glow. Margaret, Thomas, names I didn't know, all with tags flapping, all moving. They didn't walk, they jerked, limbs twitching like broken puppets, their glassy eyes locked on me. I swung the knife, shattering one, then another, but they kept coming, climbing over the shards, their cracked mouths opening wider. I bolted for the door, but it slammed shut, the bolt clicking into place. The windows wouldn't budge, the glass cold and unyielding. The dolls closed in, their footsteps a staccato thud, and Elliot Crane was at the front, its tag swinging, its face, my face, twisted into something I didn't recognize. I screamed, slashing wildly, but they swarmed me, small hands gripping my legs, my arms pulling me down. I don't know how long I fought. When I woke, the loft was quiet. The dolls were gone, box empty, trapdoor shut, walls intact. My phone buzzed on the floor, Jen's text glowing, you okay? You didn't answer, I typed back, hands shaking, fine. Just tired, but when I stood, the floor creaked under me, and in the hollow below, something scratched, soft, patient, waiting. The house wasn't much, a sagging shack on the edge of a coastal marsh, the kind of place you'd miss if you blinked driving by. I bought it sight unseen, a cash deal from an estate sale, because it was cheap and far from everything. After the divorce, I didn't care about charm. I just wanted solitude and the gray sweep of saltgrass, and see beyond. The porch promised that. The realtor's email said the garden was overgrown, but that was generous. It was a snarl of brambles and weeds choking the yard up to the steps. I didn't plan to touch it. I'm no gardener, my hands are better with a keyboard than a shovel. But on the second day, I noticed something odd. From the kitchen window, I could see a patch near the fence where the weeds bent, like something had settled there. Curiosity got me. I grabbed a stick and waded in, the thorns snagging my jeans, the air thick with salt and rot. It was a doll. Half buried, its plastic face peering up through the dirt, one blue eye crusted shut with mud. Its hair was a matted blonde mess, and its dress, once white, maybe was stained brown. I pried it free, the roots clinging like they didn't want to let go. It was old, the kind with a pull-string mouth that probably talked once, but the string was gone, the mechanism silent. I turned it over, looking for a maker's mark, and found a faint scratch on its back. Property of L.M. No idea who that was. I tossed it on the porch, figuring I'd chuck it later. The house was full of junk, cracked dishes, a rusted bike in the shed. I didn't need more clutter. That night, the wind howled off the ocean, rattling the windows, and I slept fine, the sound a dull roar in my ears. But when I stepped outside the next morning, the doll was in the garden again, not where I'd found it, but closer, near the gate, sitting upright like someone had posed it. I stared, coffee mug warm in my hand. The wind must have blown it, I thought, though it hadn't felt that strong. I picked it up, its weight heavier than I remembered, and dropped it in the trash bin by the shed. The lid clanged shut, and I went back inside, brushing off the unease. I had work to do. Remote freelancing doesn't care about creepy toys. By noon, I glanced out the window again. The doll was back, this time by the porch steps, its good eye glinting in the sun. The bin was still closed, 10 yards away, no way it had crawled out. My pulse quirked, but I laughed it off. Maybe a raccoon, a gull, or something messing with me. I grabbed it, marched to the bin, and tied the lid down with a bungee cord from the shed. Problem solved? Dusk came fast, the sky bruising purple over the marsh. I was on the couch, laptop balanced on my knees, when I heard it, a faint scrape like plastic on wood. It came from the porch. I set the laptop down, slow, and peered through the window. The doll was there, pressed against the glass, its face smeared with dirt, its open eye staring right at me. The bungee cord hung limp beside the open bin, swaying in the breeze. My stomach twisted. I didn't touch it this time. I locked the door, drew the curtains, and turned up the TV, drowning out the wind. It was a prank, I told myself, some local kid screwing with the new guy. But the marsh stretched empty for miles, the nearest neighbor a speck on the horizon. I checked the locks twice, then sat up all night, listening. The scraping didn't come again, but the air felt charged, like static before a storm. At dawn, I stepped outside, steeling myself. The doll was gone from the porch. Relief hit me until I looked at the garden. It was there, by the front door's base, half buried again, like it had clawed its way up. The dirt around it was fresh, churned, and the weeds bent outward, pointing at the house. I didn't touch it. The doll sat there, half sunk in the dirt, its good eye fixed on the door like it was waiting for me to open it. The morning was gray, the marsh shrouded in fog so thick I couldn't see the fence. The air smelled of salt and decay, heavier than yesterday, and the weeds around the doll swayed, even though the wind had died. I stood on the porch, my breath fogging, and watched it. It didn't move. It didn't have to. I went inside, locked the door, and grabbed my phone. No signal, typical out here, but it hadn't bothered me until now. I paced the kitchen, the floorboards groaning under my weight, and kept glancing out the window. The doll hadn't budged, but the fog was creeping closer, tendrils licking at the porch. I needed to get rid of it properly this time. Burning it felt right, fire doesn't mess around. The shed had a gas can, half full, sloshing as I carried it to the yard. I dug a shallow pit near the shed, far from the house, and went back for the doll. It was heavier now, the plastic cold and slick like it had soaked up the damp. I dropped it in the hole, doused it with gas, and struck a match. The flames caught fast, blue at first, then orange, the doll's dress curling black. Its face melted, the eye warping into a smeary socket, and a sharp, chemical stink hit me. I stepped back, satisfied. Done. The fire burned out in minutes, leaving a charred lump in the pit. I kicked dirt over it, stamped it down, and headed inside. The fog was thicker now, pressing against the windows, but I felt lighter. I made coffee, sat at the table, and tried to focus on work. The laptop hummed, the screen's glow a small comfort. I didn't look outside. I didn't need to. Hours passed, or I thought they did. The fog muffled everything, even time. When I finally glanced up, the kitchen was dim, the light wrong. I checked my phone, 3:17 p.m. It shouldn't have been this dark. I stood, uneasy, and pulled the curtain back. The doll was there, on the porch again, unburned. Its dress was whole, its eye intact, staring through the glass. Dirt streaked its face, but no scorch marks, no melted plastic, just that scratched property of L.M. glinting on its back. I dropped the curtain, my chest tight. I'd watched it burn. I'd buried the ashes. My hands shook as I grabbed a hammer from the toolbox under the sink, no finesse, just wait. I flung the door open, the fog rushing in, cold and wet, and swung. The hammer cracked its head, splitting the plastic, the eye popping loose. I hit it again, shattering the torso, bits scattering across the porch. I kept going until it was a pile of shards, my arms aching, my breath ragged. I swept the pieces into a bag, tied it shut, and drove it to the marsh's edge, a muddy stretch where the tide crept in. The fog swallowed my headlights, but I found a spot and hurled the bag into the water. It sank fast, the ripples fading into the murk. I stood there, the silence pressing on me, then drove back, the house a faint shape through the haze. When I stepped inside, the porch was empty. Relief hit me, sharp and fleeting. I locked up, turned on every light, and sat with the hammer in my lap. The fog thickened outside, a solid wall now, and the house felt like it was floating in it, cut off from the world. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. The air was too still, too heavy. Then I heard it, a wet, dragging sound, faint but growing. It came from the garden, slow and deliberate, like something pulling itself through the mud. I gripped the hammer, my knuckles white, and peered through the window. The fog glowed faintly, a sickly yellow, and in it I saw a shape, small, hunched, moving toward the house. The weeds parted and the doll stepped out, whole again, its eye gleaming, its dress dripping marsh water. The doll stood there, water pooling around it, the fog curling off its shoulders like smoke. Its eye locked on me through the glass, unblinking, and the marsh stench seeped into the house, rotting reeds, salt, something older. I clutched the hammer, my breath fogging the window, and watched as it took a step. Not a jerk or a stumble, a deliberate stride, its plastic feet sinking into the soft earth. The weeds bent toward it, not away, like they were reaching. I backed up, the hammer's weight pulling at my arm. The door was locked, the windows shut, but it didn't matter. It had burned, shattered, sunk, and still it came back. The dragging sound followed, louder now, a wet scrape across the porch. I flicked off the lights, hoping darkness would hide me, but the fog glowed outside, that sickly yellow pulsing like a heartbeat. The doll tapped the glass, once, twice, sharp, like a nail on a coffin. I ran to the kitchen, grabbed the gas can from earlier, and sloshed what was left across the floor. Fire hadn't stopped it, but maybe it had stopped me from seeing it come. I struck a match, the flame flaring bright, and dropped it. The gas caught, a whoosh of heat licking up the walls. I bolted for the back door, the shed key in my pocket, thinking I'd lock myself in until dawn. The fire roared behind me as I stumbled into the fog. The shed was a shadow ahead, its rusted lock my only plan. I fumbled with the key, the metal slick with sweat, and glanced back. The house blazed, flames clawing through the windows, but the doll wasn't there. Relief hit until I heard the scrape again, closer, from the garden. I swung around, the fog parting just enough. It was by the pit where I'd burned it first, whole, untouched, holding something in its hands. The shed key slipped from my fingers as I saw it, a tangle of blonde hair, matted and wet, wrapped around its fists like a trophy. My hair. I touched my head, instinctive, and felt a bald patch, raw and stinging, though I hadn't cut it, hadn't felt a thing. The doll stepped forward and the ground shifted. The garden churned, mud bubbling up, weeds twisting into shapes, arms, legs, faces. Dozens of them, rising slow, their plastic skin gleaming in the firelight. Each had that scratched mark, asterisk property of L.M, asterisk, and each held something, a lock of hair, a scrap of cloth, a chipped tooth. Mine. Pieces I didn't remember losing. I screamed, scrambling for the key, but the mud sucked at my boots, pulling me back. The dolls closed in, their steps a chorus of wet thuds, their eyes, some blue, some black, some gone, fixed on me. The first one, the one I'd found, led them, its mouth moving now, a silent chatter I couldn't hear over the fire's crackle. The fog thickened, wrapping them in a shroud, and the marsh itself seemed to rise, the water lapping at my knees though I hadn't moved. I swung the hammer, smashing one, then another, but they kept coming, their broken parts sinking into the mud only to rise again, reformed. The leader reached me, its cold hand brushing my leg, and I felt it, a tug, deep in my chest, like something unspooling. My vision blurred, the fog swallowing the house, the shed, everything but those eyes. When I woke, I was inside on the couch. The fire was gone, no smoke, no char, just the stale smell of the marsh. The doll sat across from me on the table, its hands empty, its eye dull. The others were gone, the garden still outside the window. My head throbbed, and when I touched it, my hair was intact. So were my clothes, my teeth. But the mirror showed something else, a faint mark on my back, scratched raw, property of L.M. I left that day, drove until the gas ran out, and checked into a motel. The house can rot in the marsh for all I care. But last night, I woke to a tapping at the window, and in the parking lot, under the sodium lights, the weeds were growing, bent toward me, waiting. The house was a gamble. A 3-story relic perched on a ridge in the Blue Ridge Mountains. All steep gables and peeling paint. I'd found it online. A foreclosure too cheap to pass up. Perfect for a writer needing solitude after a string of deadlines chewed me up. The listing warned of minor repairs. But when I arrived, it was more like a time capsule. Furniture draped in sheets. Clocks stopped at odd hours. A faint musty tang in the air. I didn't mind. It had character, and the view of the valley fog was worth the creaky stairs. I spent the first day unpacking, hauling boxes up to the attic where I'd set up my desk. The space was cramped, all slanted beams and dusty trunks, but it had a window overlooking the ridge. One trunk caught my eye, iron-bound, heavier than the rest, tucked under the eaves. I pried it open, expecting moth-eaten quilts or old tax records. Instead, it was a photo album, leather cover cracked, pages yellowed and stiff. I flipped it open, curious. The photos were black and white, early 1900s maybe, stern faces in high collars posed on porches or in parlors. A family, generational, spanning decades. But every picture had the same odd detail. A doll, small and rag-like, perched in the frame. In a child's arms on a chair, propped against a wall. Always there, its stitched face blurry but constant. I turned page after page, the family aging, the house shifting behind them, but the doll stayed unchanged. It was creepy, sure, but old photos often are. I closed the album, set it back in the trunk, and got to work. The attic was quiet, just the wind rattling the panes, and I lost myself in edits until dusk. When I went downstairs, the house felt heavier, the shadows longer. I chalked it up to fatigue. Mountain air takes adjusting. I cooked a quick meal, crashed on the sagging couch and slept through the night. The next morning, I found the album on the kitchen table. I hadn't brought it down. I'd left it in the trunk, lid shut. My pulse ticked up, but I rationalized it. Maybe I'd carried it without thinking, distracted. I opened it again, flipping through, and stopped cold. The last page, blank yesterday, had a new photo. Me, standing in the attic, hunched over my laptop. The shot was grainy, angled from above like someone had snapped it from the rafters. And there, on the desk beside me, was the doll. I dropped the album, my hands clammy. I hadn't seen a doll up there. No toys, no junk, just my stuff in those trunks. I climbed the stairs, slow, the wood groaning under my boots. The attic was as I'd left it. Desk cluttered, chair askew, window fogged. No doll, no camera. I checked the rafters, the corners, even the trunk. The album was still downstairs, but nothing else had moved. I grabbed my phone, scrolled through my photos. Nothing from yesterday matched that image. No one had been here. The house was miles from town. The road a muddy track barely fit for my truck. I locked the attic door, a flimsy latch, but it felt better, and brought the album to the living room. I studied it under the lamp, page by page. The family stared back, their eyes flat, the doll a silent witness. My photo was still there, unchanged, but the doll's face seemed sharper now, its stitched mouth a faint smirk. That night I couldn't sleep. The wind howled, and every creak sounded like footsteps on the stairs. I kept the lights on, the album on the coffee table, daring it to move. Didn't, but around 3 a.m., I heard a thud from the basement. A single, heavy drop, like something falling. The house had a cellar, a trapdoor under the rug I hadn't opened yet. I planned to check it later, assuming it was just storage. Now I wasn't so sure. I grabbed a flashlight and a crowbar from my toolbox, my heart thudding. The rug was heavy, the trapdoor beneath it bolted shut. I pried the bolt loose, the metal screeching, and lifted it. Cold air rushed up, smelling of damp stone and something sour. The flashlight beam shook as I aimed it down the narrow stairs. At the bottom, in the dirt, was the doll from the photos. Rag body, stitched face, staring up at me. The doll didn't move, but its eyes, black thread loops, caught the flashlight beam like they were wet. I stood there, crowbar tight in my grip, the basement air chilling my legs through my jeans. The stairs creaked as I descended, each step deliberate, the beam jittering across the dirt floor. The doll was alone. No box or shelf, just propped in the center like it had been waiting. Its rag body sagged, the fabric stained with age, but its face was sharp, too sharp, the stitches pulling into that smirk I'd seen in the photo. I didn't touch it. I swept the light around, stone walls, a rusted shovel in the corner, a cracked shelf with jars of cloudy liquid. No footprints, no sign anything had been down here in years. Yet there it was. I climbed back up, fast, and slammed the trapdoor shut, shoving the couch over it. The crowbar stayed in my hand, a cold comfort as I paced the living room. The album still sat on the coffee table, my photo glaring up at me. I flipped it shut, but the leather felt warm, like it had been held. I needed answers. I grabbed my laptop, powered it on, and searched the house's address. Nothing but the foreclosure listing, a vague note about the last owner passing in '98. No names, no history. I tried Blue Ridge doll photos, family album hauntings, useless ghost stories, and antique forums. The doll wasn't mentioned, but the family in the album gnawed at me. I opened it again, studying their faces. A man with a beard, a woman in a bonnet, kids in stiff collars, normal except for that doll in every shot, unchanging while they aged. The wind picked up outside, rattling the windows, and I heard it again, a thud, softer this time, from upstairs. My stomach sank. I climbed the stairs, crowbar raised, the flashlight beam slicing through the dark. The attic door was still locked, the latch unmoved, but the thud came again from inside. I turned the latch, slow, and pushed. The room was cold, my breath visible, and the trunk was open. The album was gone from downstairs, now back in its iron cradle, pages splayed. I stepped closer, the floorboards groaning, and saw a new photo on the open page, me descending the basement stairs, crowbar in hand, the doll at the bottom. The angle was wrong, shot from behind me, low, like something had crouched there. My throat tightened. I hadn't heard a shudder, hadn't felt eyes. I slammed the album shut, locked the trunk, and dragged my chair over to block it. The doll was still downstairs, I trapped it under the couch. This had to be my mind, stress from the move, the isolation. But when I turned, the attic window was fogged, not outside, inside, streaks forming letters. Look closer. My hand shook as I wiped it clear, the glass icy under my palm. The ridge outside was dark, the valley swallowed by night, but something moved, a flicker, small and pale, near the tree line. I squinted, the flashlight beam too weak to reach. It was gone in a blink. I stumbled downstairs, the house creaking like it was settling or waking. The couch hadn't moved, the trapdoor still shut, but the album was on the coffee table again. I didn't open it. I didn't want to see. I grabbed my keys, ready to drive anywhere, town, a gas station, anywhere with people, but the truck wouldn't start. The engine clicked, dead, the battery new last month. I swore, slamming the hood, and glanced back at the house. The attic window glowed faintly, a warm amber I hadn't left on. I went back inside, no choice, the crowbar my only anchor. The living room was silent, the album unmoved, but the air felt thick, like it was watching. I sat, staring at it, daring it to shift. It didn't. Hours passed, the wind howling, until a new sound cut through, a soft rustle like pages turning, from the basement. The couch was still there, heavy as ever, but the rustle grew, insistent, pulling me down. I lifted the trapdoor again, the flashlight trembling. The doll was gone. In its place was the album, open to a photo of me sitting on the couch, staring at the table, taken from below the floor. The photo stared up from the basement floor, my own face frozen in grainy black and white, me on the couch, eyes locked on the album, oblivious. The angle was impossible, shot from beneath the trapdoor I just opened. My hands shook, the flashlight beam jittering across the dirt. The doll was gone, the album in its place, pages crisp despite the damp. I didn't touch it. I couldn't. The rustle came again, faint, from deeper in the basement, not the stairs, but the walls. I swung the light around, the stone glistening wet in the beam. The shovel still leaned in the corner, the jars glinted on the shelf, but something was off, the shadows didn't match. They stretched too long, bending where the light didn't. A soft thud echoed behind me and I spun. The trapdoor was shut. I hadn't closed it. My breath caught, the air sour and tight, and I pounded the wood, the crowbar useless below. It didn't budge. The rustle grew, pages flipping, faster now, a frantic shuffle. I turned back to the album, still open to my photo. The image shifted as I watched, my head tilting, slow, like I'd moved in real time. I hadn't. I was here, staring down, not on the couch. The crowbar slipped from my hand, clanging on the stone, and the sound reverberated, too loud, too hollow. The walls pulsed, a faint ripple in the dark, and the album flipped to a new page, me, in the basement, looking at the book, the trapdoor shut above. I lunged for the stairs, clawing at the wood, but it was solid, seamless, like it had never opened. The flashlight flickered, the beam dimming, and the rustle turned to whispers, low, overlapping voices I didn't know. I grabbed the album, tore the photo out, and ripped it in half. The whispers stopped. The air stilled. I exhaled, shaky, and dropped the pieces. They fluttered down, but when they hit the dirt, they were whole again, me, intact, staring up at myself. The doll appeared then, not fell, not rolled, appeared, standing by the shovel, its rag body limp, its stitched face sharp. Its mouth moved, a silent chatter, and the album flipped open in my hands, though I hadn't touched it. Page after page, me in the attic, me in the kitchen, me outside by the truck, each shot closer, the doll nearer, its smirk wider. The last page was blank, then filled, me here, now holding the album, the doll behind me. I turned and it was closer, inches away, its thread eyes glinting. I swung the crowbar, missed, and hit the wall. The stone cracked, dust spilling out, and the doll didn't flinch. It stepped forward, small, deliberate, and the basement shifted, the walls leaning in, the ceiling dropping, the jars toppling with a crash. Liquid spread, thick and dark, pooling around my boots. The whispers returned, louder, my name in every tone, asterisk Clara, Clara, Clara asterisk, though I hadn't told anyone here. I threw the album at it, pages scattering, and ran for the shelf, grabbing the shovel. The doll followed, slow, its head tilting like it knew something I didn't. I swung, the blade slicing its arm clean off, but it kept coming, the stump leaking a thin, black thread. The photos littered the floor, me, each shifting, my face blurring, melting into the family from the album. The bearded man, the bonnet woman, the kids, their eyes became mine, their mouths mine, the doll in every frame. The basement shrank, the walls pressing tight, the air choking me. I swung again, shattering its head, but it reformed, stitches sewing shut before my eyes. The whispers screamed now, a cacophony, and the album was in my hands again, whole, open to a photo of me swinging the shovel, the doll intact behind me. I dropped it, stumbled back, and the trapdoor flew open, light pouring down, blinding. I climbed, gasping, and fell into the living room. The couch was back, the rug flat, the house silent. The album sat on the table, closed. The doll was gone. I grabbed my keys, ran to the truck, it started this time, and drove, the ridge fading in the rear view. I stopped at a motel, checked in, and slept with the lights on. The next morning, my bag was heavier. Inside, wrapped in my jacket, was the album. The last page showed me sleeping in the motel bed, the doll at my feet, holding a photo of the house, my house, its windows glowing amber. I didn't open the album again. It sat in my bag, a lead weight I couldn't ditch as I checked out of the motel. The clerk barely glanced at me, her eyes on some game show blaring behind the counter, and I was grateful for it. The truck rumbled to life, the ridge a smudge on the horizon as I drove south, aiming for the city, people, noise, anything to drown out the quiet that followed me now. The radio crackled, static cutting through every station, but I left it on, a lifeline. Halfway down the mountain, the rearview mirror caught something, a flicker in the back seat. I slammed the brakes, tires skidding on gravel, and twisted around. Nothing. Just my bag, the album's leather edge peeking out. My pulse thudded, but I kept driving, hands white on the wheel. The static hissed my name, asterisk Clara asterisk, once, clear as a bell, then faded. I turned it off, the silence worse. I stopped at a gas station, the neon buzz a thin shield. I locked the truck, left the bag inside, and went in for coffee black, scalding, something real. The cashier, an older guy with a smoker's rasp, nodded as I paid. Rough night? He asked. I forced a smile, muttered something about the road, and glanced out the window. The truck's dome light was on. I hadn't touched it. I ran out, coffee splashing my hand, and yanked the door open. The bag was unzipped, the album splayed across the passenger seat, open to a new photo. Me at the gas pump, seconds ago, the cashier's blurry shape behind me. The doll stood in the foreground, its stitched face turned my way, one hand raised like it was waving. I slammed it shut, threw it in the back, and peeled out, the station shrinking in the dust. I don't know where I'm going now. The house is behind me, the motel too, but the album's still here, its weight heavier every mile. Last night, in a new room, I woke to a rustle, pages turning, soft, insistent. I didn't look. I don't need to. I know it's waiting, rewriting me into its family, one photo at a time. The apartment was a shoebox, third floor, one room, a kitchen nook you couldn't swing a cat in, and a bathroom so small I had to squeeze past the sink to shut the door. I took it because it was cheap, and after the layoff, cheap was all I could afford. The building was old, pre-war, with thin walls that let in every cough and TV jingle from the neighbors. The bathroom mirror was the only luxury, full-length, bolted to the wall, cloudy but grand in a way the peeling linoleum wasn't. I noticed it on the third night. I'd been brushing my teeth, half asleep, the fluorescent buzzing overhead when the reflection shifted. Not me, just behind me, a flicker like someone stepped into frame and out again. I turned, toothpaste dripping, but the room was empty, shower curtain limp, door shut, no space for anyone to hide. I wiped the mirror, figuring steam or smudges, but it was clear. My face stared back, tired and unshaven, alone. The next night, it happened again. I was washing my face, eyes down, when I felt it, someone watching. I looked up, water stinging my eyes, and there she was, a doll, standing in the reflection, right behind my shoulder. Rag body, burlap face, eyes like polished stones, glinting in the light. I spun, heart slamming, but nothing. The bathroom was still, the air damp and sour. I checked the mirror, just me dripping, the doll gone. I didn't sleep much after that. I kept the bathroom door closed, worked my gig jobs from the futon, and avoided looking too long at anything reflective, the microwave door, the window at dusk. But I couldn't avoid it forever. 2 days later, I had to shower. I kept the curtain half open, one eye on the mirror, the steam fogging it fast. When I stepped out, towel around my waist, the doll was back, closer this time, its head tilted, one hand pressed to the glass from the other side. I stumbled back, the sink jabbing my hip. The bathroom was empty, but the mirror wasn't. She stayed, unblinking, her stone eyes tracking me as I moved. I grabbed my phone, snapped a photo of the reflection, nothing but me, pale and panicked. I tried again, angling it, but she wouldn't show. Only in the mirror, only for me. I yanked the towel rack off the wall, swung it like a bat, and smashed the glass. It cracked, spiderwebbing from the center, but didn't shatter. The doll vanished. I called the landlord that night, voice shaking, demanding he fix it. He grumbled about tenants and damage, said he'd send someone tomorrow. I slept with the lights on, the bathroom door wedged shut with a chair. Morning came gray and slow, the apartment quiet except for the drip of the sink I couldn't stop hearing. The maintenance guy showed up at noon, short, bald, toolbox rattling. He squinted at the cracked mirror, muttered about replacements, and pried it off the wall with a crowbar. There was a niche behind it, a shallow hollow, maybe a foot deep, carved into the plaster. Inside was the doll. Not a reflection, not a trick, real, slumped against the back, its burlap face smeared with dust, its stone eyes dull. The guy didn't flinch, just grunted, "People leave weird shit," and tossed it into his toolbox. I stared, my mouth dry, as he patched the hole with a sheet of plywood and promised a new mirror by next week. He left, the doll rattling in his box, and I locked the door behind him. Relief hit me, sharp and fleeting. It was gone, tangible, taken, not my problem. I cleaned the bathroom, scrubbed the sink, tried to erase the sour smell that lingered. That night, I slept better, the chair still under the doorknob, the plywood a blank stare where the mirror had been. I woke late, groggy but calm, and shuffled to the kitchen for coffee. The drip was louder now, insistent, coming from the bathroom. I pushed the door open, the chair scraping aside. The plywood was off, leaning against the wall, the niche exposed. The doll was back, upright, its eyes gleaming again, moving slow, side to side, following me. I froze, coffee mug slipping, shattering on the tile. The niche wasn't empty behind her, something shifted, a shadow deeper than the dark, and the doll's hand twitched, pointing at me. The doll's fingers stayed pointed, rigid, its stone eyes swiveling in their burlap sockets. The shadow behind it pulsed, a slow ripple in the niche like ink spreading in water. I backed up, shards of the mug cutting into my bare feet, blood smearing the tile. The bathroom door was open, I could run, grab my keys, get out, but my legs wouldn't move. The drip echoed, louder, a wet plink from the sink, though the faucet was dry when I checked. I grabbed the chair I'd used as a wedge, swung it at the niche. Though it splintered against the wall, the doll unmoved, its arms still outstretched. The shadow thickened, spilling over the edge, tendrils curling toward the floor. I dropped the chair, my breath ragged, and lunged for the crowbar the maintenance guy had left by the sink. I swung, aiming for its head, stone cracked, the burlap tore, but it didn't fall. It tilted, slow, and the shadow surged, wrapping my ankles, cold and slick like wet hands. I yanked free, stumbling into the main room, the crowbar clattering behind me. The apartment was dim, the blinds shut, but the air buzzed, electric and heavy. I reached for the front door, locked, the bolt stuck, the key gone from its hook. The drip followed, steady, now from the walls, a chorus of wet taps closing in. I turned, and the doll was there, not in the bathroom, but by the futon, standing, its cracked head lolling, its eyes still tracking me. The shadow trailed it, a smear across the floor, stretching toward me. I grabbed a lamp, ripped the cord from the wall, and threw it. The bulb shattered, glass raining, but the doll stepped over it, unfazed, its finger pointing again, this time at my chest. The shadow coiled, climbing my legs, and I felt it, a pull, deep, like something draining out. My vision blurred, the room tilting, and I fell to my knees, the linoleum cold under my palms. The doll's mouth opened, stitches snapping, a black gash, and a sound came, low and guttural, not words but a hum that shook my bones. The shadow tightened, pinning me, and the walls wept, water streaking down, pooling around me, sour and thick. I clawed at the floor, nails splintering, and saw it in the puddle's reflection, not my face, but hers, burlap and stone, staring back. I screamed, the sound swallowed by the hum, and the doll stepped closer, its shadow merging with mine. I swung a fist, weak, connecting with its leg. It buckled, but the shadow held me, dragging me toward the bathroom. The niche gaped, the plywood gone, the doll climbing back in, pulling me with it. I grabbed the doorframe, fingers slipping in the wet, and kicked. Its arms snapped off, rolling away, but the hum grew, deafening, and the shadow yanked harder. My grip failed, and I slid across the tile, the niche swallowing me. It was tight, stones scraping my shoulders, the doll pressed against me, its cracked face inches from mine. The shadow filled the space, sealing us in, and the hum became my pulse, pounding in my skull. I thrashed, but the walls closed, the air gone, and the doll's eyes moved fast now, darting like they saw something I couldn't. My hands found its throat, squeezed, but it didn't fight, just stared, the hum fading to a whisper, "Stay." I don't know how long I was there. Minutes, hours, time dissolved in the dark. When I woke, I was on the futon, the apartment silent, the blinds glowing with dawn. The bathroom door was shut, the niche covered with fresh plywood, nailed tight. The doll was gone, no shards, no shadow, just the faint sour smell in the air. My feet were bandaged, though I hadn't touched them, the cuts clean and wrapped. I packed that day, left the key on the counter, and moved to a friend's couch across town. The landlord never called about the mirror. I don't look at reflections much now, windows, spoons, anything that catches me. Last week, I spilled coffee, mopped it up, and froze. In the puddle, faint but clear, was a burlap face, stone eyes glinting, watching. I scrubbed it away, but that night, in the dark, I heard it, a drip, slow and steady, from the wall behind my head. I don't sleep much anymore.